There comes a moment when every avoidant meets someone they can't unfeel. For the avoidantly attached, control is safety. Distance is comfort. They've mastered the art of disappearing, slipping out of closeness just before it becomes too real. Every relationship, every connection, every almost love follows the same invisible pattern. Approach, retreat, repeat. But once in a while, someone enters their life who doesn't fit the pattern. Someone who doesn't chase, doesn't cling, and yet somehow doesn't leave. That person becomes the exception, the one they can't push away. Avoidants are used to emotional predictability. When they pull back, others usually react. They protest, over-explain, beg for reassurance. That reaction gives the avoidant control. It reinforces their belief that closeness equals danger and that they're safer alone. But when the person they pull away from simply breathes and stays grounded, when they respond with calm instead of chaos, something shifts inside the avoidant. For the first time, their distance doesn't buy them freedom. It creates confusion. Because this person isn't trying to get them back, they're simply not leaving. And that terrifies them. The avoidant begins to feel something unfamiliar, emotional friction. Their usual defenses, silence, distraction, withdrawal, stop working. The other person's quiet self-assurance doesn't collapse under rejection. It stands there, steady, like a mirror the avoidant can't look away from. In that mirror, they see themselves, the fear, the avoidance, the loneliness disguised as control. And it burns. Because this time, the escape doesn't feel clean. It feels like loss. They start wondering, why can't I just move on? Why does this one feel different? It's not because of chemistry or charm. It's because, for the first time, someone reached the part of them that still hopes to be known. Someone touched the nerve they've spent a lifetime protecting. This isn't about chasing love. It's about being seen, truly seen, by someone who doesn't demand, doesn't pressure, but simply stays. And that, for the avoidant, is the beginning of change and the hardest thing to resist. If you want to better understand how to deal with avoidance, then subscribe to the channel to know everything. Avoidants survive through distance. It's not cruelty, it's survival. They believe that closeness leads to pain, that vulnerability invites disappointment, that to need someone is to risk everything. So they build invisible walls around their emotions, tall, quiet, almost beautiful in their precision. Those walls have worked for years. Until now. When they meet someone they can't push away, those walls begin to tremble, not because the other person tries to break them, but because they don't even try. The avoidant expects resistance. They expect pleading, guilt, negotiation, emotional noise that justifies their escape. But instead, they find silence, acceptance, and the unsettling calm of someone who simply refuses to play the game. This calm doesn't attack their walls. It makes them irrelevant. And that's what breaks the avoidant open. Suddenly, their usual strategies don't make sense. Ignoring texts doesn't feel like control anymore. It feels like disconnection. Withdrawing doesn't create safety. It creates emptiness. They still pull away, but it's not the same. There's hesitation now, even regret. The person they're distancing from isn't chasing them, but they also aren't disappearing. They exist beyond the avoidant's control, and that's what makes them unforgettable. Internally, the avoidant starts to spiral. They replay small moments, a look, a laugh, a silence that felt peaceful instead of demanding. They don't know why it stays in their mind. They don't understand why they keep checking their phone, why the thought of being forgotten by this person feels unbearable. It's not love yet, it's disruption. The kind that cracks open the illusion of emotional safety they've built their entire life around. Because the truth is, distance only works when you don't care. Once you do, every inch of space starts to ache. And that ache, that quiet haunting, is what tells the avoidant they've met someone different. Someone who can't be reduced to a pattern or a defense. They've met someone who reaches past their avoidance and touches the human underneath. And when that happens, running no longer brings peace. It brings longing. There's something deeply unsettling about being seen when you've spent your whole life avoiding it. For the avoidant, emotional visibility feels like exposure, like standing in bright light with nowhere to hide. But when they meet someone they can't push away, that person becomes a mirror. Not a mirror that judges, but one that reflects truth with unbearable clarity. This person doesn't demand that the avoidant open up. They don't pry. They don't chase explanations. They just listen. They notice patterns. They respond with calm instead of chaos. And that steady presence becomes the most confronting experience the avoidant has ever known. Because in that stillness, their usual excuses stop working. Their silence isn't misunderstood, it's understood too well. Their distancing isn't punished, it's respected. And that respect, ironically, is what makes it hurt. The avoidant begins to see themselves through this person's eyes, not as detached or independent, but as scared. Scared of being needed, scared of being known, scared that if someone truly saw them, they might find them unworthy. This mirror doesn't accuse. It simply shows them what's always been there, the ache behind the avoidance, the longing beneath the control. And that realization is both awakening and excruciating. They begin to recognize the patterns, the jokes that deflect, the silence that protects, the emotional exits disguised as independence. They see that what they've always called space was sometimes just fear dressed up as freedom. This awareness doesn't immediately heal them, it disorients them. Because when you've built your identity around distance, closeness feels like losing yourself. But here's the paradox. With this person, the avoidant doesn't feel lost. They feel calm, grounded, safe, even. It's confusing. How can someone see through all their walls and not make them crumble? That's the power of emotional stability. It doesn't chase. It doesn't control. It invites. And for the first time, the avoidant feels the difference between being cornered and being seen. And once you've been seen like that, you can't unsee yourself. The avoidant has always been the one in control. They decide when to connect, when to retreat, when to offer affection, and when to disappear. That rhythm, that push and pull, has kept them safe. Until this person came along and flipped the entire dynamic upside down. At first, the avoidant doesn't notice it happening. They still think they're in charge. They take longer to reply. They withdraw after a deep moment. They test the silence to see if the other person will break it. But the silence remains intact, calm, unbothered, steady. And that's when it starts. The power they once held begins to dissolve. Their emotional distance, once a weapon, now feels like a wound. They don't realize it right away, but they've started reacting, checking if that person viewed their story, thinking about their tone in the last message, replaying old conversations, trying to decode what they meant. The emotional control they've always relied on gone. For the first time, they're the one wondering, do they still care? It's subtle at first, but it grows. And what began as curiosity becomes obsession. The avoidant begins to feel the discomfort of vulnerability without consent. They didn't choose this connection. It happened to them. And that loss of control triggers something primal. They want to retreat, but retreating doesn't make the feelings fade. It makes them stronger. They want to feel nothing, but every quiet moment brings that person's presence flooding back. Their detachment, their oldest coping mechanism, has turned against them. This is the emotional reversal. The moment the avoidant becomes the pursuer, not through words or actions, but through thought. They might never send the text, but they'll draft it. They might never say, "I miss you," but the silence will say it for them. Every time they try to move on, they find themselves circling back to the same question. Why couldn't I push this one away? The answer is simple but devastating, because this one didn't try to hold them. They let them go. And nothing unsettles the avoidant more than losing someone who didn't fight to stay. Avoidants don't chase people, they chase control. For most of their lives, connection has been a careful game of management. They keep it just close enough to feel alive, but never close enough to get hurt. Yet when they meet someone they can't push away, that game stops working. Their silence no longer feels powerful. Their retreat no longer feels peaceful. Instead, they feel the one emotion they've spent years running from: fear. Not the kind of fear that's loud or dramatic. This fear is quiet. It sits under the ribs, humming like static. It shows up in overthinking, in hesitation, in the way their mind replays moments they thought they'd forgotten. Fear that maybe this time, they actually care. Fear that this person saw something real. Fear that they've been seen and won't be chosen anyway. The avoidant starts to feel their own contradictions collide. They want to pull away, it's instinct. But they also want to reach out, to check if the door is still open. That tension is unbearable because it reveals something they've long denied. They don't avoid people because they don't need love. They avoid them because love feels like danger. It threatens their illusion of independence. It exposes how much they've always wanted connection, even as they've pretended otherwise. When the avoidant begins to care, everything becomes harder. Texting back takes courage. Showing up feels like a risk. Vulnerability feels like surrender. They may try to hide it behind sarcasm, busyness, or emotional flatness, but underneath, there's chaos. Their heart races when they see that person's name appear. Their chest tightens when it doesn't. The person they can't push away becomes both a longing and a mirror of everything they've feared: intimacy, rejection, and the loss of emotional control. But here's the truth they slowly start to realize. The fear they feel isn't proof that something is wrong. It's proof that something matters. It's the sign that the wall is cracking, that connection has made it through. For the first time, the avoidant isn't running from someone else. They're running from their own capacity to feel. And that's the scariest and most transformative part of all. Control has always been the avoidant's safety net. It's how they make sense of chaos, deciding when to engage, how deep to go, and when to vanish. It gives them the illusion that they can manage love without being consumed by it. But when they meet someone they can't push away, that illusion begins to shatter. Because for the first time, their emotional distance stops protecting them. It isolates them. At first, they try harder to maintain control. They tell themselves it's fine, that they don't care, that it's just another connection. But deep down, the story is already unraveling. They find themselves checking in silently, scanning their phone, looking for signs, replaying what they said. Every small interaction feels heavier, every silence more personal. And the moment they realize they've lost emotional control, panic sets in. This panic isn't loud or visible. It's subtle, a tightening in the chest when they sense disconnection, a restless scrolling through messages they'll never send, a quiet fear that they've pushed too far this time. They might start acting colder, thinking distance will restore balance. But the more they detach, the more it hurts. Because now, distance doesn't bring peace, it brings grief. The person they can't push away begins to occupy emotional real estate they never meant to give. They catch themselves caring about that person's mood, feeling affected by their absence. That dependency, the one thing they swore they'd never allow, sneaks in, disguised as curiosity, then turns into longing. And with every passing day, the avoidant feels something terrifyingly human. They miss someone. Not for validation, not for control, but because that person's presence brought calm to the chaos they carry inside. And yet, they won't admit it. Instead, they fight harder against the feeling. They tell themselves, I'm fine. I don't need them. But denial doesn't erase emotion. It traps it. Their control is slipping, not because they're weak, but because connection was never meant to be controlled. And deep down, they know this person didn't take their power. They revealed the truth, that real intimacy was never about control in the first place. For most of their life, the avoidant has lived behind invisible walls, sturdy, silent, and meticulously maintained. These walls are built not from arrogance, but from fear. Fear of being needed too much. Fear of being seen too clearly. Fear that if someone truly got close, they'd uncover the fragile truth beneath all that independence. that the avoidant isn't heartless. They're scared. But when they meet someone they can't push away, those walls begin to crack. Not from pressure or pleading, but from presence. The other person doesn't demand entry. They simply stand at the edge, patient and unafraid. They don't beg for connection, they offer it. They don't force intimacy, they embody it. And that's what makes the avoidance walls tremble, because this kind of love doesn't attack, it invites. At first, the avoidant resists harder. They'll find reasons to pull back. They'll call the connection too much or say they need space. But that space doesn't bring relief like it used to. Instead, it feels empty. The quiet that once felt peaceful now echoes with absence. And for the first time, they begin to question what the walls were ever really protecting them from. It's not the person they fear, it's what the person awakens. The longing, the tenderness, the old wounds that whisper, "You're not enough." This person doesn't expose those fears intentionally, but by being consistent, by staying calm, by refusing to play the emotional tug-of-war, they make the avoidant feel safe enough to finally feel. And feeling, for someone who's built a life around avoidance, is both liberation and terror. The avoidant starts to experience moments of surrender, small, fleeting, but real. They open up accidentally. They share something vulnerable without meaning to. And when the world doesn't collapse afterward, a strange realization begins to dawn. Maybe connection isn't destruction. Maybe it's healing. Those cracks in the wall don't signify failure. They signify life. For the first time, emotion is breaking through the numbness. The wall is still standing, but now, light is getting in. The avoidant has never trusted peace. It feels suspicious, too quiet, too calm, too unfamiliar. They've learned that safety often comes before disappointment, that comfort is just the pause before loss. So when they meet someone who offers real emotional safety, their first instinct isn't gratitude, it's panic. This person doesn't react to their distancing. They don't chase when the avoidant pulls back. They don't explode or beg for closeness. They just remain, grounded, composed, present. For most people, this would be comforting. For the avoidant, it's disorienting. Their entire nervous system is tuned to chaos, to highs and lows, to patterns they can predict and control. But this calm person is different. They don't operate by fear. They operate by trust. At first, that trust feels like pressure. The avoidant mistakes steadiness for expectation. They assume, they must want something from me. But as time passes, they begin to notice. This person's calm isn't a tactic. It's who they are. They aren't waiting to be chosen. They've already chosen themselves. And in that realization, the avoidant feels both admiration and discomfort. Because deep down, they've always longed for this. Someone who doesn't demand that they change, but inspires them to. Someone whose peace feels like a doorway, not a trap. Yet that very peace unsettles them. It reveals how much noise they've carried inside, how much emotional chaos they've mistaken for control. As they spend more time around this person, the avoidant notices something subtle but profound. They start to relax. The constant scanning for danger quiets down. The urge to withdraw softens. They find themselves speaking more freely, laughing without calculating, being present without guarding every emotion. They begin to feel something they've never fully allowed before, safe. And that safety, paradoxically, scares them the most. Because now, they have something to lose. The walls they built were meant to keep out pain, but they also kept out love. And now, standing in front of someone who feels both steady and real, the avoidant faces the deepest dilemma of their life. Do I run from what feels safe, or stay and risk being loved? It happens quietly. No grand gesture, no breakdown, no dramatic realization, just a moment. Maybe it's in the middle of a conversation, or in the way that person looks at them without judgment. For the first time, the avoidant feels something that isn't fear, control, or confusion. It's tenderness, the kind they've buried under layers of detachment. They don't know what to do with it. Their first instinct is to retreat, to intellectualize, to run the feeling through 100 mental filters until it dissolves. But this time it doesn't. The tenderness stays. It lingers in their chest, soft but heavy, asking to be felt. And the avoidant, who has spent a lifetime avoiding their own emotions, realizes that they've crossed a line. They've started to care in a way they can't undo. This person they couldn't push away has become more than just an exception. They've become a mirror, a teacher, and a quiet revolution. Through them, the avoidant has learned that love doesn't have to be engulfing. That being seen doesn't have to mean being exposed. That vulnerability isn't a trap, it's a bridge. And for the first time, they begin to understand why all their old defenses never worked. They weren't protecting them from pain. They were protecting them from love. In this stage, the avoidant's inner world becomes beautifully messy. They still retreat sometimes, still fall into silence, still wrestle with the old instinct to self-protect. But now they notice it. They catch themselves pulling away, and they pause. They begin to question their impulses instead of obeying them. Growth for them doesn't come as grand transformation. It comes as small, deliberate moments of staying. The person they can't push away isn't saving them. They're simply showing them what's possible. That connection doesn't have to cost identity, and closeness doesn't have to mean collapse. And for the avoidant, that's a revelation that changes everything. Because the moment they finally allow themselves to feel, even just a little, is the moment they realize they've never been running from others. They've been running from themselves. There comes a time when running loses its meaning. The avoidant, once defined by retreat, begins to understand that distance doesn't protect the heart, it isolates it. And in the quiet aftermath of their patterns, something extraordinary happens. They stop. Just stop. No dramatic goodbye, no final vanishing act. Just a pause long enough to feel the pull of connection instead of the panic of it. The person they couldn't push away is still there, steady, self-contained, unthreatening. Not waiting, not chasing, simply existing in their own light. And it's in that light that the avoidant sees themselves clearly for the first time. Someone who spent years confusing self-protection with strength, withdrawal with peace, silence with safety. But in truth, none of those things ever brought peace. Only loneliness dressed as control. Now, something different stirs. It's small at first, a willingness. A text sent instead of withheld. A conversation continued instead of avoided. A truth spoken softly instead of buried. The avoidant begins to discover that intimacy isn't about losing yourself. It's about showing up as yourself, even when it feels impossible. They learn that safety isn't found in walls, but in presence. That love isn't suffocating when it's chosen freely. That letting someone in doesn't mean losing power, it means sharing it. And for the first time, they understand that connection isn't a threat to independence, it's what gives it meaning. The person they couldn't push away may not stay forever. They might not even become a permanent part of the avoidant's life. But what they leave behind is something far more lasting, awareness. A new blueprint for what love could look like when it isn't ruled by fear. And maybe, just maybe, the avoidant learns that the bravest thing they'll ever do isn't walking away. It's staying, even when every instinct tells them to run. Because staying isn't weakness. It's healing. If this message resonates with you, share your thoughts in the comments, subscribe for more, and pass it on to someone who might need to hear it today.